Hello YouTube, it's the Grognard DM back again for another rambling thought on various gaming experiences. This time I'd kind of like to talk about battle mats versus the theater of the mind. Not everybody has played theater of the mind in recent years, I've just grown to discover, so let me indulge me as I give a brief definition. Basically, theater of the mind means no battle mats, no minis. You have to imagine the setting as the DM describes it, and you have to imagine how the combat is staging and flowing. You have to know to ask, can I do this? Is this guy within range of me being able to charge over to him and hit him? Um, things like that, things that are up to the DM's discretion as he's visualizing how the combat plays out. For those that love a very tactical approach to combat, especially with more modern systems where if you pass too close to an enemy, you might provoke an attack of opportunity. If you're careless in your path navigating the battlefield, knowing exactly how to be in position for a flanking attack, or in the case of game systems where a backstab is quite literally behind one. That's not just AD&D. Knowing when your character that can backstab is in a position to do it. It has its advantages, and certain games like Hackmaster, you almost need to have a battle mat because of the fact that until you're engaged in melee, your character can literally move about the battlefield every second, a certain amount of distance. So people who prefer to engage at range, like bow monkeys or spellcasters, they're basically moving every second, repositioning themselves continually to get a better shot the next time they're able to act. Meleeers, once you're in melee, it's just your weapon speed. But first edition, because it had those wargaming roots still, very frequently was mini heavy, and the whole concept of the backstab of the first edition thief, literally, you weren't rear flanking, you weren't on the flanks, you weren't on the front flanks or right in front, you were behind. The graph has 8 squares surrounding your figure. With the concept of the scaling that got introduced in 3rd edition to D&D, that became also a little more relevant because, say, an ogre is a large-sized creature, so it's got a reach of 10 feet. You, standard player character of a player character race, has a range of 5 feet. So in getting into melee with that ogre, you've got to come within its reach before you can make an attack, so it gets an attack of opportunity to try and knock you on the head before you can do anything. A little bit more relevant. For me, not as much, because of the kind of games that I play. My only issue with dealing with battle mats is the amount of time it takes away from the game to, for instance, draw the current encounter space and then position everybody's miniatures on the mat. It takes only a few seconds, you might say. Yes, but if there are features that they need to be aware of in the room, like an evil altar that somebody travels through its space is theoretically touching it unless they're flying over it, and it happens to be an evil altar that does damage if a good aligned character touches it, that becomes significant. I've got to draw that altar onto the map as well, and I'm not the world's best artist. I also am not a mini collector, so I frequently wind up using something that is highly unevocative on the field, such as dice. If I were really old school, I could cut up some pieces of cardboard and have cardboard chits. But then again, if I were really old school, I'd have different colored pieces of cardboard in a different numbering order in a bag. Okay, shake, shake, shake. Now draw a chit. That's what you rolled. not that old school. I've got plenty of dice. Let's use dice. If I was more of a mini collector, I'd have plenty of miniatures. Let's do the battle mats. So it's very simple for me. It's a faster pace of storytelling as a DM. It's a faster pace of play for the players. And also, it sometimes can be a little less intimidating. I ran a game last night, which was the kind of game that players love and hate. They love it because at the end of the game, at the end of the night, they weren't sure they're going to pull it off, and they did. And they hate it for the same reason. I have 5 characters, 2 NPCs, and 3 player characters. One of the NPCs was dead. Another player character's PC was unconscious, nearly dead, about halfway. It was Pathfinder, so he was a mythic character, so it was going to take a goodly while for him to actually be killed. But he was something like negative 14 or 15 hit points. So he was definitely down. And the other 3 characters were all down to the single digits in hit points. So any one of them, one hit from the bad guys, and that character's gone. So, and the character that died early on, and that was their arcane, the NPC. That was their arcane blaster, so that took out some of the firepower. If I'd been doing a battle mat, the sheer numbers would have definitely made them rethink the encounter entirely. And it was an encounter that needed to be played. It wasn't a runaway encounter. So that had it going for it, and that they didn't, to be mean, they didn't chicken out. And also, the drawback is that had they seen it all laid out before them and decided to fight anyway, they might have chosen different tactics. One of the player character that wound up unconscious, he's made a player choice that his character has a romantic interest in the NPC. So when the NPC that died got blasted, he kind of went into almost a berserker rage. He has an ability to call someone out for single combat, and all of his benefits wind up getting lost if someone else joins in that combat. So he's singling out the big bad villain, the one in charge of everything, for single combat. And he was a 6th level character fighting a challenge rating 10 monster, which meant that monster should alone by itself been a challenge for an entire party of an epic challenge for an entire party of 10th level or 6th level characters, and we got one going against him. That was bad enough. It was a spell user. He casts stone skin on himself, so without an adamantine weapon, 10 points getting absorbed every swing. So this fighter's just nickel and diming him for 2 or 3 points every swing in terms of actual hit point damage. This is a sort of character that the entire party should have charged at. It's a damage dealing situation. Don't try to finesse things. Don't try to be fancy. There were some creatures that the gunslinger in the party could very easily have been taking on, so they didn't have any kind of damage absorption or anything like that. So he should have been sniping, doing massive amounts of damage because, yeah, gunslingers, and taking out basically the 8 mooks, groundlings. The nasty outsiders that were in the room wound up being really a non-issue. You know, I wasn't rolling for spit for any of them, especially the ones that were throwing around scorching rays. I couldn't hit anybody's touch AC to save those Daemons' lives. And so there were only really two significant enemies on that battlefield. The mage and his second command, which was a half-orc barbarian. And really, honestly, given their abilities, the paladin should have taken on the mage, and the fighter should have taken on the barbarian. Worked on dropping him so that he could then join the mage, or the paladin on the mage. And then the rogue did what the rogue should do, roam around the field looking for opportunities to assist by stabbing into people. But it was definitely a damaging situation. The gunslinger, the player loves doing called shots, which are all well and good, but if you're going to say, well, I'm going to try a groin shot on that guy, well, that's at least a -10 to your attack roll for hitting an area, trying to hit an area so small. At least a headshot, maybe a -4, because the head's fairly significant target. But the game isn't really set up for hit locations, so it's like, okay, you're taking penalty to do a called shot, so you can describe that, yes, you shot him in the head. You're still rolling your die for damage like normal, and I'm deducting it from the hit points like normal. He's not high enough level to get the gunslinger's call shot deeds, which have specific effects, as well as specific targeting guidelines. So he wasn't helping the cause much by doing that. Also, trying to intimidate by doing a startling report. You're just firing a warning shot, hoping to intimidate the target. The fighter had no unarmed combat feats like improved grappling like that, and at one point he decided to try and do that with the mage. Well, since he doesn't, first of all, the mage was able to take an attack of opportunity on him with his magic quarterstaff, hit him, did damage, and then on top of that, he didn't even manage to make the combat maneuver roll. At one point, he was thinking real world. Okay, this guy's got stone-like skin. Instead of attacking with a blade, I'm just going to try and hit him with the pommel. Not thinking in terms of, well, that's a -4 to use the weapon in a way it's not designed to be used. And on top of that, I'm not going to give you your full damage, because you're hitting with a little tiny area that's not meant to be a combat area. So I might have given him 1 to 3 points of damage, plus a little bit of his strength, but he wouldn't have gotten his specialization bonuses, his weapon training bonus. He was just doing this. So there's 2 rounds where he sacrificed damage dealing against somebody that he was fighting that had very high damage soak of a limited basis. So there were some tactical flaws in their thinking. And at the end of the night, I told them this was a situation where it's damage, damage, damage. You guys are badly outnumbered, and then you lost early on your area effect person. So you need to think about who can do the damage. Why should the paladin have gone against the mage? He could have done a smite evil, which bypasses all damage reduction. Now, during the game, I made him feel a little better by saying, well, his DR is due to a magical effect, so no. But really, honestly, when it says bypasses all damage reduction in the description, it bypasses all damage reduction. So the paladin would have been waylaying on the big bad, dealing really significant damage, and his spell shouldn't have mattered. The barbarian had, yes, a damage reduction that they didn't have the tools to bypass, but it was a 5. The fighter could blow past that, no problem, and have willed him down and held him. Because that's the other thing, the fighter's got one of the highest armor classes in the group. So the barbarian would have been swinging and missing an awful lot. So the two primary targets for the tanks should have been reversed. And did they know? Not really. I mean, it's not like a stone skin spell is obvious. Oh, look, it's a living statue. No, you got to get up close and notice that the skin's got a little bit different texture. It's not an obvious protective spell. But at the same time, it was a bit of a tactical nightmare. But they pulled it through, and there was much celebration at the end of the night. It was a sort of game that a lot of players love to play. The gunslingers were remarking, one of the things I love about this game is it's so cinematic. Well, any game is cinematic if the DM knows how to run it. For me, Hackmaster is incredibly cinematic. The D6 Star Wars is incredibly cinematic. So it depends on how the DM runs it, how fast-paced you make the game. Actually, thinking in terms of cinematic, a lot of my players in my old Rollmaster game, not only thought it was cinematic, they thought we should start recording our sessions and transcribing them and writing books based on the adventures, fantasy novels. But yeah, it just depends on the game master, and it depends on how the game is written. Because Star Wars the D6 is definitely written with a cinematic feel in its mind. And you're supposed to try and keep the pace up, keep everything moving forward rapidly. But as far as the cinematic feel, I think for me, Theater of the Mind is the approach to kind of take for that, because you can, as you're describing the flow of the combat, you can take liberties. And again, people talk about DMs fudging the rolls and DMs doing this and that on the fly. Yeah, well, if it's Theater of the Mind and the players are having a rough time of it, I can start missing rolls, and when they say, I'm going to go and do this, I'm going to go and attack this guy, I don't have to force them to navigate or make sure it's a straight line without any attacks of opportunity so they can charge their opponent. I don't have to do any of that. If they're having too easy a time, then yeah, I can start saying, well, there's this, and this in between the direct line, and if you go in a direct line, these people are going to make an attack, get an attack against you as you charge your opponent. Or as you move here, oh, you provoked an attack from the ogre. So I can ignore attacks of opportunity or use them based on whether I want to make the encounter more difficult or less challenging. And that's based on the kind of luck the players were having that night. It also didn't help last night that there were some definite die rolling issues. The paladin made a critical hit against that barbarian. He's wielding she's a female character, wielding a great sword. So 46. He rolls 1 6 and 3 1s. And there were plenty of ones being rolled, and they are all very profoundly grateful that I'm not using special effects for fumbles as well as critical hits. The only thing that I do is with the one is the gunslinger rolled a 1 with her musket, and that was a misfire. That musket's broken. And like, okay, putting that to one side, pulling the pistol. But so if you have players that are highly imaginative and like filling in the gaps and picturing things in their own minds, Theater of the Mind is definitely the way to go. If you have a group of players, and this is true for me at least, if I have a group of players that tend to be very tactical and they like to know the lay of the land, They're going to move their mini, they want to move a mini in a way that is tactically advantageous and so on and so forth. Okay, I'll pull out the battle mats, and if I don't have enough minis, I'll say, well, we got dice. But, and use my largest size dice for the big creatures. But the, otherwise, I'm flexible in that regard. I want my players to have the most enjoyable experience that they personally can have. And so that means pulling out a battle mat, putting things up. I'll pull out the battle mat. I have no problem with it. If they prefer a faster pace game, especially if it's a smaller group, and they just want it boom, 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 it's theater of the mind. And it's been very theater of the mind for me recently because of the games on Discord. I am not technologically advanced enough to be able to project interactive battle mats on Discord. So at that point, it's so much easier and more convenient for me to do a theater of the mind approach. In person, I'll do whichever the party prefers. So that's my thought on doing the battle mats versus the theater of the mind. I can't claim that this is an old school Grognard thing to do theater of the mind because, like I say, when we were first playing AD&D in the late 70s when they were publishing the initial books, to 79 when the last book was published, we were still playing it much like the war game of chainmail it started in. So there were minis and grid hexes or grid mats set before us, and you were moving your minis around. So that's not a Grognard thing. That's actually, if you want to say it, put it, the modern people that prefer battle mats and minis, oh, you're Grognards. Welcome to the club. I jest. But I find the theater of the mind faster paced, personally. And maybe it's because of my own limitations as far as drawing things around and not having all the miniatures. So I hope you enjoyed this little ramble, and I hope some of you that are theater of mind people feel inspired to give a battle mat a try, and those who are tied to the battle mat, I hope you feel inspired to just give it a try, one session, see how theater of the mind runs for you and your players. Until next time, remember, if there's a particular topic you want me to address, leave a question in the comments, or those that know me personally, go ahead and reach out to me on Facebook or Twitter and ask me a question, and I'll disclose my thoughts on it. I'll take the next week or so to think about it. So until next time we chat, may all your hits be crits.